Well, thank you all for being here. We have a bit of a relay thing going on. We're going to hand off the baton between the three of us. I'll start off with a bit of psychology, which really are the basics of learning. A lot of my work has to do with just reminding people of the basics. What is learning fundamentally, and how is it that we can better improve that learning experience? Then we'll hand it off to my colleagues with the Academy that will give you a really great overview of the program that we've developed to help with this transition of students in a particularly vulnerable stage in that learning journey. So with that, we'll get started. If you have questions throughout, I encourage you to sort of raise your hand or just speak up. I'd like an interactive format. I do know that there is a mic, so if you do want to say something, we'll try to capture your voice, because all of this is being recorded so that we can share it more widely. So one of the basic premises that I like to remind us all is that when it comes to learning and we think about learning, that learning is not simply this content mastery experience where we expose students to textbook content, hope that they are able to digest and absorb that content, and then regurgitate it on a test. That is not the essence of learning. Learning really is a social experience. And the reason why that's the case is because as we navigate our learning journeys, we have to do one very important thing. We have to experiment with whether or not we identify as learners or not. An example of this particular phenomenon is something that I come across when I work with athletes. Sometimes I'll get these athletes who are very, very accomplished in their sport, but then they'll talk about challenges or uncertainties about being able to perform academically. And I'll start talking about the sport of their choice, and they'll clearly demonstrate some strong math aptitude, learning skills, understanding how to calculate scores, complex plays, and yet you ask them how they feel about mathematics, and all of a sudden they sort of recede into their skin and feel like that's something that they cannot do. And so when it comes to learning, my argument is that it really is this experimentation with various social identities as learners, and how we are able to include individuals into those learning identities is really to create an inclusive environment where they feel they are valued, where they feel that they are competent, where they feel that they can accomplish the requirements of that particular domain. So when it comes to learning, it's important to realize that it is a social experiment. When you think of walking, for instance, we all know how to walk, I assume. We all learned how to walk at some point, and yet when you look at the actual process of learning how to walk, you see a young child stumble over and over and over again. But what you don't see is them ever getting discouraged. You don't ever see them giving up. You don't also see their parents say, you know what, he's given this a try for a couple of months. He might not be a walker. So within all of those interactions, there's never a doubt that a child will become a walker. And yet when it comes to our academics, that's not the same assumption that we have. At some point, the question of whether or not you can be a mathematician or a math person or a physics person or a science person is in question. And so that's one of the premises that we need to be mindful of. So that as we address and try to include students to have those identities, we know what's at stake here. Now, the other basic tenet that I like to include you all into is that when it comes to identity experimentation and identification, there's a lot of subjectivity that goes into that process. So with a show of hands, how many people see a bird when they see this picture? Same, with a show of hands, how many people see a rabbit when they see this picture? So same picture perceived differently by different people. Now, what's interesting is when they actually show you this same image at different times, your own answer would have varied as well. So context, depending on when you see something or experience something, has a powerful effect on how you make meaning of the situations that you encounter. As we think about the ambiguities that students have to navigate, there are constantly these moments of ambiguity that they have to make sense of. Is a cold interaction with my professor mean that he doesn't think I'm smart enough? Is not being invited to that party mean that I'm not included or I don't belong here? If getting that D in that math class mean that I can't do this? These are the ambiguities that students have to navigate. And a lot of those have to do with how people are sort of invited into the conversation of learning. And so that's one of the things that we'll talk about with what the Academy is doing to really foster that. I'm going to drive this home with one more example, and then I'll hand it off, to show you the subtlety of the influence of context. And so in one series of experiments, what they did is they invited men and women into the lab, and they were told to fill out some questionnaires in a TA's office that was basically decorated with the kinds of things you might expect. A poster of Star Trek, some sci-fi books, some Coca-Cola cans. And then after this experiment, what they did is they asked these men and women how interested they were in computer science. Now, the participants saw one of two conditions. They saw one of two rooms. Either this room, which is a prototypically male kind of room, and you wouldn't even think that because you think, well, this seems pretty normal. But in the other condition, what they did is they replaced those cues with more gender-neutral cues. And what they found was that these subtle differences in terms of either gender stereotypical cues or the gender-neutral cues had some pretty powerful effects, especially for women who are questioning, is this a place where I might feel like I can belong, where I might feel like I'm valued, where I can perform well? And that impacted how interested they are in the field in general. So if something as subtle as these cues in the environment has such a profound impact on a student's willingness to engage, how much more can we do? And being mindful of those moments, those touch points with those students in terms of how we are able to include them in the conversation and the process of learning so that they have the identification as an adaptive learner, that really is at the core of what we strive to do with all of this work. So I'll pass it off to my colleagues. I'll sort of skip that one.
Okay. Thanks, Omid.
Of course.
So much of the research that Omid talked about really identified this fact that developing a sense of belonging and this identity formation as a learner is heavily predictive of whether or not students will succeed within our higher ed institutions, right? But if you think about what we have done as institutions of higher ed to try and intervene and try to help students who have struggled within our institutions, it is typically not those things. It is typically within these two domains of learning, the cognitive and the metacognitive domains. So, and I would argue that that really makes two core assumptions about our students. The first assumption is that knowledge is about content mastery. So the cognitive domain would say that if we just presented the information in a better way, if we constructed the knowledge in a more evidence-based approach, the students who weren't getting it before would get it now. The other is that some students, or many students, just don't understand how to learn. And we could solve that by telling them how to learn. And if we gave them the strategies of how to learn, they would learn better. The third thing is, if as institutions we really want to help all students succeed, we can't keep doing things the same way we have always done them, or we will continue to get the results we have always gotten, right? We have to do something radically different. So that's what we are proposing within Academy. We've added the third element within our design, which is this non-cognitive approach. This non-cognitive or social emotional learning is not novel. You hear this phrase used a lot within the K through 12 realm. In fact, within the last 5 years, I would say that we're hearing that phrase a lot more, but not within higher ed. It is still largely within its infancy. In fact, 2 years ago, I went to a conference that was dedicated to social emotional learning, and I was one of the only participants there that was from higher ed, and was asked a couple different times why I was there, because social emotional learning is not for higher ed. That is a very strange mindset. Higher ed is not exempt from the problems that we have with learners about mindset, about motivation, about the core beliefs of, can I succeed? Right? Can I do this thing? If a student's struggle is, can I learn it? Can I be a math student? Making a more beautiful, more effective math course, teaching them a study strategy, or developing a time management skill will not address that core issue. So what we are proposing is that there needs to be a balance of those three approaches. And what I'm going to go over in the next few slides is sort of some core elements of how we have attempted to balance those three things. It doesn't argue that the learning science and the self-regulated learning are not important. They will always have their place, but they have to be balanced with addressing the psychology of the student and the core beliefs that they have about themselves and their ability to learn. So it starts right at the beginning. We know that many of the students that we serve within Academy are first generation. They come from low-income households. They are ethnically diverse. They often have full-time jobs, many more than one. They have a lot of preconceptions and fears about whether or not they belong in college. So from day one, right at the beginning in orientation, we emphatically tell them, you belong here and you are a college student. We address those concerns head on. We're not afraid to talk about the fears that they may have coming in the door. Additionally, that we know throughout the literature that this can be effective. Even these small surgical interventions have already shown great efficacy throughout different institutions. But they don't necessarily want to hear it from administrators. They don't want to hear from professors about the fact that learning is hard and learning can be a struggle, right? They need to hear from students that look like them, that have experienced challenges like them, about how they overcame those struggles and what it's going to take to succeed. The other factor that we've tried to incorporate within Academy is to take that design element about belonging and weave it throughout the other portions of the experience. So it doesn't just happen in orientation. You then take those stories and experiences of students and put it in other courses. So we have a flipped design approach where you do your homework on your own and you come to class and you get a chance to hear from the experiences of your peers. You show up on Zoom, not just since COVID, but pre-COVID, and get a chance to work through meaningful topics together and hear about the challenges and experiences that you have trying to incorporate these topics into your life. This sense of belonging is the glue that brings students together and creates that accountability that keeps them in the program together. This is a picture that was taken by a man named Kyle. Kyle was hiking on a trail here in Utah. This is not far from my house. And he talked about, he was running and he came upon a set of cubs. So he pulled out his phone, thinking that he could get a video of these baby cubs. And out came this mother cougar. So he started to back up, and the mother cougar charged forward. So for the next 6 minutes, this mother cougar charged and stalked and charged and stalked. And Kyle later described this experience as the longest 6 minutes of his life, where he was convinced that he was going to die. Within milliseconds of this happening, we know from biology that Kyle's brain kicked off a process where his amygdala created a cascade effect of his nervous system, right? Creating the fight or flight response. Daniel Goleman coined this as the amygdala hijack. Many of you have probably experienced this throughout your lives. You can think of like your heart racing, your palms sweating, hair standing up on the back of your neck, right? I would bet my entire salary that every single person in this room has experienced this fight or flight response multiple times in their life, but have never actually had it look like a cougar fighting or running from you. So there are several other things that happen when this is going on in your body that are really key to the learning process and why I'm pulling this out. The first is that when this process triggers in your brain, when the amygdala kicks off this nervous central process, the amount of information that you're able to take into your brain is dramatically reduced. So think about Kyle and this threat of the tiger. Your brain focuses on that threat, and everything else that's happening around you is filtered out. So whatever the perceived threat is the only focus. Your hearing goes away, most of your vision goes away. They call it tunnel vision or tunnel hearing. The other important emphasis is that the emphasis is on the negative. So any other positive stimuli in your environment are also filtered out. Because our brains are optimized to expend the least amount of energy, if you will, we go into habit. So any type of creativity or innovation, gone during this. Any old habits are all you're able to rely on during this time of survival. Because of the hormones that flood your body, your ability to have empathy and compassion are almost completely eliminated. And most of your main bodily functions are paused during this time period. So if you think about all of these things that are happening within your body within milliseconds of any type of perceived threat from this portion of your brain that is literally meant to keep you alive, what if I told you that your amygdala gets it wrong a lot of the time, and that you actually are having these perceived sense of threat all the time, regularly, at work, at home, at school? It would seem pretty important for us to learn to become aware of when this is happening within our own bodies, especially if you go back and think about creativity and innovation, gone. Information being reduced, gone. Sole focus on negativity, right? Helping students understand this process, if our brains are wired in this way to keep us alive, very good for Kyle, kept Kyle alive. Not so great when you're sitting in front of your boss who's giving you this performance review, wasn't a great year, getting a lot of negative feedback, don't want to react in the way that I might fight, right? Failed a math test again, getting a bad grade on a paper, don't want to react in a way with a teacher, causing me to disengage from this online course that I just don't think I can do. I give up. You're right. I'm not a college student. I'm not meant to be here. These are all fight or flight responses. The effectiveness of our courses are not going to overcome these things. These are beliefs we have about ourselves. So how do we overcome it? We can't change our biology. We're not going to undo the wiring in our brain. We're not teaching students to, get rid of the amygdala. What we're doing is helping them understand when it's happening and what the strategies are for overcoming it. These are the core elements of what we're doing within Academy and within PACA. And I would argue that these are life skills that employers would likely value as well, right? How we show up at work, what problems we're trying to solve within our businesses, and within our families, within our societies, within politics, right? So why does it matter? Because we need engagement, because we need knowledge retention, because we don't want to be victims to automatic processes that are happening within us. And because when you are aware of what's happening, when you cultivate this sense of mindfulness and awareness, suddenly you have choices. When I understand, when I'm getting that feedback from this person, from my boss, from this person in a position of power, and I'm sensing, I'm feeling that heartbeat racing, I'm feeling that sweating, I can ask myself, what's going on here? I'm not actually being threatened, right? I can take a moment to breathe, choose how I want to react in that way. Same thing with the math course. Math gets a bad rap, but it happens. The third element that we've chosen to use is coaching. Coaching is a word that's thrown around a lot. Some people use it synonymous with mentoring, advising, so all kinds of support services. We are specifically using coaching that is built upon a framework of motivational interviewing. This is used in cognitive behavioral therapy. It's also used in executive coaching. Really what we're trying to do is take these awareness and skills that students are building in this curriculum, in the group work that they're doing, and then give them a partner that they can continue to leverage and personalize their plans with, right? It's about flourishing and thriving and long-term retention of those skills and plans. So we could have a whole session that goes into motivational interviewing, but we will not do that today. So I'm going to hand it over to Reshma to tell you about, is it working? What are we seeing?
Thanks, Chelsea. Yeah, so we just talked about all of the research, we talked about intentions, and I would love to just be like, yeah, it works, don't worry about it. We didn't, test anything, but we did. We actually, so I'm gonna start with a couple tidbits from the students themselves because they know if they feel that sense of belonging. Good intentions don't always have the best of consequences, and so we really do need to check in with our students. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about some more objective measures that we've used to really test our programming at Academy. So we partnered with the Cicero Group last spring. Don't know if you guys recall those unprecedented times. They were a little hectic. And for our students who, as Chelsea pointed out, low income, often working multiple jobs, first generation, imagine starting your college journey at those times. And so we had partnered with the Cicero Group to ask questions about the student experience. Is it as optimal as it could be for the students? And one of the questions that they were asked is, what do you think is the purpose of all of these things that we just highlighted, of PACA, of Academy? How do you feel about what's going on? And so overall, there was a very high satisfaction amongst the students, and I wanted to just highlight a couple of their responses here. First person talks about how when you take online courses, you don't expect often to have that support network. You don't often expect to even interact with other students. It's like that textbook at midnight when you've put the kids to bed, and that's about it. But at Academy, they're not going through it alone. They have that support network of peers that they can teach and they can learn from. A couple other people talked about how this whole experience of going through this very intensive course made them feel less alone. It highlighted what they might have been doing that might have been holding them back. So behaviors, thought patterns that they might have held on to, those stress responses that they might just constantly be in a state of stress because, again, we're talking about very difficult times with very difficult lives often. But being able to go through it with people that look like them, that have some of the same struggles, very, very impactful. And this final quote is something that I've often gone back to of, PACA helped me realize that I make my own fears. So if I can create them, then I can control them. This goes back to, with awareness comes choice. We don't stop at that awareness point. We always provide the strategies. We always give them platforms to really apply everything that you hear about in the news with, generalized self-efficacy and no worries at all. No worries. And growth mindset, and really apply it to their own lives, their careers, their relationships, and their academic journey. So again, just highlighting, this was all done in the spring of 2020. We're talking about very, very difficult times, and for students to feel that sense of belonging definitely helps them in their academic careers as well. Another aspect of PACA is that we really try to make sure that what we're saying we're focusing on is actually happening. So when we stand here and say PACA, raises awareness and helps build resilience and helps build emotional intelligence and self-efficacy, again, you shouldn't believe me if I don't have data to back that up. And so what I can show you is that we find that there is, a 3.3% increase in generalized self-efficacy from before students start this course to afterwards. So we present them with a pre-post survey. We're measuring lots of different constructs, not just these two. And we're really asking them to reflect on their own views, their own thoughts and beliefs, using very well-validated and reliable scales to assess, was there actually growth? And we see that there's growth, for example, in self-efficacy, which really taps into their beliefs about their capabilities. So exactly all of the things that we want them to feel more capable. And growth mindset, the idea that you can improve, you can change, you can adapt with the challenges that get thrown at you. And so again, this is very, very exciting data for us that the programming that we're offering the students is having the positive impact that we want it to have. Obviously, the students that come through Academy, we want to optimize their experience with us. We want to make sure that they have the most inclusive and foundational experience that they can possibly have, but their journey doesn't end with us. Our students come to us with the goal of achieving a degree. They want to go on through. Most of our students go on to Western Governors University to achieve their degrees. And so we are what we believe a very important stepping stone in that process, but we really want to also measure our success in how our students are doing once they go forward. Is that foundation that we're building actually working for more objective measures of success? As I said, all of our students come in with that goal of earning a degree. We don't really want to wait 4 years to see if something's working or not. And so, as with a lot of other institutions, we have measures of success in the interim. So at WGU, a couple of those measures are at the x-axis here. So term 1, on-time progress, 7-month retention. For those of you that have been at institutions or work at institutions, I ask that you think about analogs of just making minimum progress, hitting that threshold in your first term. So at WGU, that term lasts 6 months, and students are expected to hit 12 credits, to earn 12 credits in those 6 months. If they do, yay, they've earned OTP. If they haven't, then they haven't. And so what we're looking at is comparing of the students that graduated from Academy, how are they doing at achieving these performance metrics relative to those students who've never been to Academy who are also at WGU? Is what we're doing actually furthering their academic performance? So on the x-axis, we have 0 to 100, representing the percent of students in each of the groups that have achieved that metric. So starting with that term 1 OTP, so this is their first 6 months. The lighter bar represents those students at WGU who never went to Academy, and the darker bar represents Academy graduates. For somebody to graduate from Academy, they had to have completed that PACA course, and in this case, complete an additional 2 courses. So what we're seeing is that for term 1 OTP, for what's known as 7-month retention, meaning that they finish that first term and they sign up for that second one, often a huge barrier, especially for students who are coming from first-generation, low-income households, balancing a lot of things. Continuing on with your degree is very, very important, but it's also very, very difficult oftentimes. We're seeing that, again, Academy grads are achieving that at a higher rate. So a higher percentage of Academy grads are hitting that metric than those students at WGU who never went to Academy. And again, same thing with term 2 OTP. So again, I ask that you think about analogs in your own institutions, what you might have had to achieve as you went through college on your way to achieving degrees. Why is this important? Institutional research at WGU has identified that if a student hits both that term 1 and term 2 OTP, there is a substantial increase in their odds of getting that 4-year degree and going on to achieve that degree. So this is very, very exciting and promising data for us because, again, it seems to be the case that we are continuing to set up our grads for success and that we are helping them achieve their overarching goal of earning that degree. Oftentimes, people present that data and everyone claps and it's wonderful, and nobody really thinks about, okay, let's drill down further into those groups that often struggle in educational realms. So instead of just looking at the aggregate, we were very, very intentional and focused to make sure that we were looking at just those first-generation students, just those low-income students, and those students of color. to really see, are those overall patterns holding true when we look at those students that we have tried very hard to be intentional about in our design, to make sure that these students all felt that they too are college students, they too belong. And so again, for the sake of time, I'm just going to focus on term 1 OTP attainment. As a reminder, this is just in those first 6 months, did the students hit their 12 credit minimum in their first term at WGU? Lighter bars represent non-Academy WGU students, and darker bars represent Academy graduates. Here you can see, so the x-axis, the first set of bars represents first-generation students. Those are students whose parents never completed a bachelor's degree. And so we're comparing first-generation non-Academy students to first-generation Academy grads. And we're seeing that those first-generation Academy grads, a higher percentage of them are achieving that term 1 OTP relative to their counterparts. The same is true for low-income students. These are students who have an annual household income of $35,000 or lower. And then lastly, for students of color. So we're seeing those same patterns exist, and this has been consistent, for students in typically historically marginalized populations as well as the overall aggregate. So putting it all together, it looks as though adding that non-cognitive element, really integrating it throughout our programming, building that college identity for students who might not come in with that, making sure that they see themselves in the coaches who are facilitating them. They hear experiences like their own from the peers that they sit with in PACA, is having an impact on their own sense of belonging, on their growth in generalized self-efficacy, growth mindset, and it's having long-lasting academic performance impact 6 months, a year down the line. So thank you all. I'd love to take your questions. Yes, and we have the mic.
First of all, thank you guys so much for what you just presented. This is such an important topic. I couldn't be more enthusiastic that higher ed is picking it up in greater numbers, hopefully, if you guys are a leading example. I had a question just kind of about the data.
Yeah.
When you take a look at the academy students, are they selected to be in the academy? Do they volunteer to be in the academy? Is there a selection bias in the data that we're looking at?
That is a really good question, and most often that is not the case. They are actually referred to academy on account of typically low prior academic experience. So that could be a low high school GPA, not really having any college experience, and so most often they're actually referred to us as a first step.
Referred by WGU, they basically
Typically.
take the lowest scoring students. So you could line up that data around performance as well on the way in
Yes.
for assessment?
Yeah, and one thing that I want to point out is that those patterns that I show you persist even when I take into account number of transfer credits that they had coming in, race, gender, first generation status, all of those different factors.
And just quick follow-up, is there a report that we could all have so that we could go make this case in more places? Have you guys put together like a white paper that we could access in some?
I am going to get in touch with marketing, and yeah, we have we have a Forbes article out that talks about these data, and we have reports that we've put together. So I'm happy to share that with you.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Anything else?
Hi, thanks so much for your wonderful thanks so much for your wonderful presentation. I was curious about how you actually deliver the non-cognitive components. So is there time built into their class schedule for this, or does it function like an extracurricular activity?
Do you want to take this? Yeah.
Sure. That's a great question. So we have designed a specific course right now that is fully transferable into multiple higher ed institutions as a credit-bearing course, and it is built upon the non-cog layers. So, and then we're additionally building in those non-cog components into other academic courses. And then coaching itself is built upon non-cog as well. So sort of woven in different areas. We're trying to sell Academy as a holistic approach.
So you have like a course that's part of the 12 credits, but then the motivational coaching part is it like outside of the 12 credits?
It is.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very inspiring. So I'm very interested in the coaching part. Is that kind of like a mentoring program, or is it one-on-one, or so how does that work?
Yeah, another great question. I would say it's similar to mentoring in its approach in that it is one-on-one and it is personalized. The differentiator really is in the training and education that's required. So a mentor typically is a subject matter expert in the field, right? In the field in which a student wants to study. They're providing you advice or guidance, or in academics, it might be around those metacognitive study strategies and really helping you, guide you on what you need to do to be successful. A coach, on the other hand, is trained to elicit strengths and to help you navigate sort of challenges that you may encounter to bring out what you need to do to be successful. They believe that you know the answers, you have them within yourself, you don't know how to articulate them. And so in many ways, motivational interviewing started in CBT and in therapy. They're using a lot of those similar approaches, and they're trained in similar ways. They're not licensed therapists, but they do have a special certification that comes through the International Coaching Federation. So
I'll only add to that one of the strongest interventions in education happens to be with these WISE mentors, where they had effects of close to 2 standard deviations. And they looked at what it was that these mentors were doing, in particular, that was most effective. And what they found that they were doing is that these mentors were actually just asking a lot of questions. And when you do that, you're sort of battling the traditional roles where you as the student are learning and absorbing what me as the expert is sharing with you. Because then with questions, you're sort of invited to that conversation. And again, that's where the identification can occur. And I think that's sort of what part of the processes are here, is that there's really an opportunity and space for an interaction that is informed and led with a lot of questions that includes the students into that experience.
Hi. Thank you for the presentation. Very interesting. So my question is, I can see that you manage smartly removing the negatives, right? All the fears and how to channel that. Have you explored what are the positives? Or it's like intrinsic motivation, extrinsic, making their parents proud, or really getting opportunities in life? Have you been able to identify where are those that really make an impact?
Yeah, so that's actually something that we ask about in the enrollment process itself. What are the reasons you're doing this, and what are the reasons you're doing this now? And so the goals that people have and the motivators are exactly those things that you touched upon. Making my family proud, fulfilling a lifelong dream that I've had, going up in the corporate ladder, improving my career right now, being able to better provide for my family. And so then when they do have these personalized meetings with their coaches, the coaches can again highlight those motivations and in times of struggle or setback, really remind the students about their own motivations.
It's a quick question. Was Academy created exclusively to serve WGU students, or is the vision that it will partner with other institutions, employers, and if that is the vision, what does that kind of look like?
We're actually already partnering with other institutions and employers and organizations, and so that is very much aligned with the vision, and it looks like being able to apply this to different populations, really incorporating a lot of this holistic experience to better the careers and academic journeys of a lot of other students.
I have a question about the requirements to be a coach. So can you share what some of those requirements are, and in what ways do you factor in DEI frameworks to ensure that they're representative?
Yeah, great question. One of the most important factors in order to create inclusive design is that our staff represent the populations that we serve. So we are doing work to make sure that we can represent their gender, age, ethnicity, right, in the best way we can, even geographically across the U.S. The training, we're sort of playing with different types of certifications. There are different coaching federations that offer coaching programs and certifications at different routes. I'd be happy to talk with you separately if you'd like to learn more. But there are a lot of routes that you can explore to earn coaching certifications. There are even health and wellness certifications for coaches as well.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I have two questions. So one is, you talked about their students' mental health and well-being. Is there any way you're tracking that, or that you're enabling the students to track it on their own? And then the second question is, looking at that picture, what's the role of peer support, of them supporting each other, and is there a sort of formal element of peer support in the program?
Go ahead. Okay. So in terms of, as Chelsea pointed out, our coaches are not, for the job, they might be on their own. They're not licensed therapists. And so that is not, we're not providing therapy there. In terms of the peer support, we have that baked into the PACA experience. We also have a very lively Facebook group where students can ask questions of each other. We have lobbies built in, so discussion forums where they can, again, feel their own utility, provide answers, especially if they've gone through a lot of the same experiences, keep in touch with each other, share their contact information. So all of that is very much encouraged of our students. Yep. I think that's all the time we have. We're happy to connect with you all at another point. Thank you again so much.
I've got a quick withdrawal.
Yes.